Clash of the Titans, the Fantasy Major League Rugby Championship, all comes down to this week, and we find out who gets their name etched in the Fantasy MLR history books and their name on the championship jersey behind me. We get you all set up with a special guest joining this week's show with the latest news and notes, the top performers from round 16 that got us up to this point, and a look ahead to the biggest round of the fantasy year. The Fantasy Ruckers Show starts right now.
Where rugby and the world of fantasy sports collide. Welcome to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, talking all things rugby from the MLR to leagues around the world. We're on top of it. Headphones on, pads off. This is the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Yee, Matt Yee, and Devin Vanderpool.
What's up, everybody? This is episode number 69 of the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Thank you so much to our Fantasy Ruckers League members, our community members, and everyone else tagging along on this journey of trying to make fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR. And Championship Week is finally here in Fantasy MLR. And of course, every single week on the Fantasy Ruckers Show, always joined here by Matt Yee. I'm, of course, Ryan Yee. Don't have Devin Vanderpool on this episode number 69, but we got a nice special guest here, and you may be able to guess why he might be on the show in just a moment's time. But John Fitzpatrick of Rugby Morning is here on the show to join us to help us break down the past week, look ahead, and maybe give us a little glimpse into the very key matchup that he's got going here into this championship week with our very own Matt Yee. Guys, how's it going?
Good, man. Good. I was gonna say Vandy looks a little bit different this week. I was looking and I was trying to find the mustache, find the bald head, and I couldn't find either. So also the sadness from losing in the toilet bowl. So couldn't find any of that. But hey, it's great to have Fitzy here. It's been a long time, and it's only fitting that you came on this week.
Well, Maddie, I came with props. And this prop right here, if you can see that is a Tyrannosaurus Rex. I'm the T-Rex in this matchup. You're just a little tiny little dinosaur that's about to get chewed up and spit out. I've been gunning for this all season long. We've played each other twice. We're 1-1. It's the rubber match. I've listened to you all season long just talk about how rock and roll is just running through and over everyone.
Now you can listen to it in person live.
And now I'm here. And look, you know what? Actually, earlier in the season, when we were going through the scripts of how it should all be written out, this was the one that I selected as having the best chance of happening. And I'm so excited to be here. It took a lot to get here. MLR stats was not easy to get past. Congrats to James Dealey on his very first season with the Fantasy Ruckers Show. But I'm so ready for this matchup, Maddie.
I must say, Fitzy, it took a lot of poop emojis to get here. There was a lot of poop emojis from the draft all the way till now. But we're here.
You've been a good sport about it. I will say that for the most part. You've been a good
Wait, Fitzy, I'm sure you got a lot pent up. We're going to get it all out during the show for you to take it out on Maddie all episode long. And yeah, if you guys have not picked it up yet, the chance for one of these two to get their name etched in the Fantasy MLR history books is here coming up this week in round 17. The jersey behind me is awaiting to get its second name put on it. Of course, we have John JJ Tolt, who was our inaugural winner last season. He's not going to be the lone name there anymore. Fell early on there in the earlier stages of this Fantasy MLR playoff, but now we're left with Fitzy's Rugby Morning squad and, of course, Maddie's Ruck and Roll team. We're going to break that all down in this episode. We're going to talk about the Fantasy Ruckers League, talk about the journey that it took to get to this point, of course. Obviously, talk about the round 16 matchup that led to, I would say, guys, a pretty exciting week of Fantasy MLR. Fitzy, you had yourself a week. Some guys really coming big for you. Maddie, a little bit of a stressful time for you as well, as you etched out a win there against a very, very competitive Dankus Anchors Hokie side. So we'll get into all of that, of course. Talk maybe a little bit about championship strategy, because we got the two of you here heading into this upcoming weekend, your guys' thoughts and how you're going to approach this week, which got me very, very interested. And then, of course, preview the exciting round 17 that is going to come that will decide who will be our Fantasy MLR champion. But hey, before we get into any of it, like we said, every single show, if you aren't already, it's not too late to do it. This is going to be the most exciting week there is in all of, I could say probably in all of the history that we have been doing this Fantasy MLR thing. Got the website. It's been absolutely rolling this season, made the game completely different Stanford. And you can check that out, thefantasyruckers.com. All of the stats, all the fantasy stats, the normal stats. You can check out the Fantasy Ruckers League. It's been absolutely fantastic. And you can find the handles above our socials at the Fantasy Ruckers above us as well if you want to stay the latest up to date with everything fantasy MLR. And of course, we do have that Discord channel as well that you can find in the description, where we have a great community there talking all things rugby. But hey, let's get into it. And I guess before we get into the fantasy, the hardcore fantasy stuff, guys, and talk about what you guys, I know, really want to get into and your fantasy championship matchup between you two, let's talk a little bit news and notes, because it seems like there are some things going around on the league, especially as we approach the tail end of the season. 2 weeks remaining left in the regular season for MLR. Some teams now solidifying their spot in the playoffs, so we got to get over that. Let's talk about it. I mean, the Seattle Seawolves, to start off with, clinching their playoff spot here. I think that was pretty much expected that they were going to do that eventually. That Western Conference has been very, very competitive. San Diego Legion doing it last week. The Seattle Seawolves in that second spot in the West being able to do it this week.
Yeah, I mean, no surprise there. I think we all expected and all season have kind of known Seattle had that one of the playoff spots locked down. It's just a matter of who's going to get the third one.
I got to say, Seattle is impressive, right? They're keeping so much pressure on San Diego, and I know you're going to jump in and talk about San Diego in a second here, but it's crazy that San Diego, with 11-game win streak, has still yet to lock down the number one seed simply because Seattle's been playing so well and putting so much pressure on them.
Yeah, I mean, talk about contrasting kind of competitiveness, I guess, for lack of better terms, between the West and the East. But we'll talk about that East still, because it's still very, very important.
Yeah,
Matt's been talking about that all season long. East about he has a bone to pick with the Eastern Conference, but nonetheless, it doesn't matter. They are in the Eastern Conference, and Old Glory DC side is taking advantage of that. They have clinched their spot in their victory over the NOLA Gold over the past weekend into the championship series. I believe it's their first ever booking into the playoffs in their franchise's history. Fitzy, I know you got the Glorious Rugby podcast with our very own Alistair Kirschpool, who's the brainchild behind our website, who's absolutely been brilliant all season long, and really fantasy MLR would not have taken the steps it has this season without him. I know you run that podcast with him. You got the inner Old Glory DC blood running through your veins, and you must be pretty excited to see that they have clinched their playoff spot here in the 2023 championship series.
Yeah, absolutely. Considering the year they had last year when they won 3 games, they went 3-13. We're getting, run out of the stadium by most teams last year, had 50 burgers dropped on them left and right. Awesome turnaround for Old Glory DC. They did end the end of last season was a little bit better, far more competitive. I think they laid the foundation for what was going to happen this year. But yeah, congrats to them, and shout out AKP, who's a big diehard Old Glory DC fan, for putting all the Fantasy Ruckers stuff together. And I don't know if you guys saw, he celebrated Old Glory's playoff berth with some nasty shot at a pub, and yeah.
I expect
big
no
poop
less
emoji.
from. No kidding. I expect no less from AKP. That guy's an absolute mastermind, and he deserves at least having some, especially going through the season he had with Old Glory DC last year.
Season ticket holder.
Yeah. So pretty impressive stuff there. All right, shifting over. I know, Fitzy, you quickly touched on it, but yeah, we got to mention the San Diego Legion here, because this is a big one. First team in MLR history to reach 50 wins with their big time win over the weekend. Honestly, if you had told me and added me to guess who was going to be this, I don't think San Diego would have gone to the top of my mind, honestly, for being this team that getting there. But I think that just goes to show you the consistent level of play that they've had over the course of the number of seasons that they've been with the league. I mean, 50 wins is no joke to be had. First team to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably if you ask us 2 or 3 years ago, we'd probably look at the Guiltinis as one of those guys to do it. But, Gilchrist had to go and screw that up for everybody. So San Diego it is, and they've taken that. And I mean, look, they're 13-1 this year. It's no surprise. They're racking up wins this year, and that definitely has helped them out.
I don't want to toot my own horn too much here, but I made an end of the season.
But go ahead.
But I'm going to do it here, because I'm going to take Maddie's role here, because Maddie loves to talk about himself. So I'm going to step in. This is uncomfortable for me. But the email that I sent on Rugby Morning for January 1st of 2023, I made some predictions for 2023. And a lot of my predictions have been off. And like I said, the American Raptors were going to win 6 games in SLAR. They didn't. I predicted a San Diego Legion New England Free Jacks final with the Free Jacks winning. So that is coming together. I've got the receipts. So we'll see.
We'll see.
We'll
We'll see. I
see.
mean,
Hey, you know what else? You know what else you predicted was me at the top of the draft board. Look at you go! You are
See what I
on a
mean?
roll with
See
these
what I mean?
predictions.
there you go. All right.
A
And then
plus draft, the best draft in fantasy rugby history.
There you go. All right. Now, shifting over to now, I mean, in hindsight, you probably wished you taking that prediction back there, Fitzy, because now you're going to be facing that team. We'll see
All the
whether or
pressure's
not,
on him. All the pressure's on him. He's got the greatest
Okay.
fantasy rugby team of all time. I'm just honored to be conversation.
There you go. All right. Shifting over to some more serious news here. I think we've touched on this show before. There has been inklings about this, but it looks like things are coming to fruition. And it looks like that there is talks between the United States Rugby Players Association, or at least a line of communication that has begun between them and the MLR to get these MLR players represented by a union here and get them all, I guess, working together here, represented by the United States Rugby Players Association. Fitzy, you mentioned your email, Rugby Morning, that gets shot out every single day. Great follow there. If you aren't already, go check it out. Subscribe, www.rugbymorning.com. It's a nice little daily dose of rugby that I like to take in every single morning when I have my cup of coffee in the morning before work. But yeah, why don't you dive a little bit into this, Fitzy? I know you have some ties there with the United States Rugby Players Association, know some details there. So kind of the developments here, the latest developments, I should say, between them and the MLR.
Yeah, I'll start off by just saying full disclosure. I did some commercial work for them back at the 2019 Rugby World Cup around player name and number t-shirts. But yeah, the U.S. Rugby Players Association, the collective bargaining unit that represents the men's and women's 7s and 15s national teams for the U.S., sent a letter to MLR basically saying, hey, unless you guys voluntarily recognize USRPA as the collective bargaining unit for MLR players, for the MLR players to form a union, we're going to go and file in front of the National Labor Relations Board, which essentially brings the owners and MLR to the table. Now, it's really fascinating because, I think people hear the word unionization and they kind of take a step back and say, hey, is the timing right? Like MLR still a startup league in its 6th season. A lot of the teams still aren't profitable yet. They're trying to make it work and teams are going well. Like, why introduce this here and now? And I think, the other side says, hey, the players are the future, the product that they put out on the field. And, I think there's a way they can all come together and make it work. And I think what is interesting, one is the timing of it, right? So this is coming out right before, the playoffs, which is interesting, which could be leveraged. But then 2, they haven't really asked for, if you look at their, I wouldn't say demands of like their 3 pillars, they haven't said anything about like increased wages, right? Like where we want a bigger share of the pie, which typically when you see like strikes and lockouts in other sports, right? The players are either striking because they want more money, or the owners are locking out the players because they want their share of the pie to get bigger. That's not really the conversation here yet, because I think everyone knows the opportunity is still growing. They're asking for playing better field conditions, some more say on where they're able to go and stay, and also just like health insurance stuff, right? So, I think it's all reasonable, and I think be interesting to see what happens, and hopefully it doesn't lead to any labor issues, because can you imagine if there was a strike? I think that would probably be the end of MLR if that were to happen. So knock on wood, that doesn't happen. So we'll see that.
Yeah. Well, like you said, I think it's a very unique scenario. I mean, again, you look at the power sports across North America, all of them have players associations that represent the players within their league. I think the key thing there, Fitzy, is just timing-wise. Is this the right time, especially with how young and how much, I guess, more the MLR has to grow? Is this the right time to be introducing something like that? I'm sure the players would say, as clearly stated in there, that letter to them, that they believe it's the right time. It's interesting to see how the MLR will respond. Definitely something to continue following moving forward. But again, I think as a totality and just and kind of just laying down the middle, it is, I guess, a positive sign that there's signs that the league is growing. And right when things like this are coming up, I think everyone has an understanding that the potential is still there for Major League Rugby to be an established thing within the North American sports world. So it is, I guess, from that standpoint, an optimistic thing moving forward. All right, now shifting over to other USA Rugby news, I'll give you the opportunity here because I know the results had just recently come out of the U20 men's squad.
Yeah.
And Matthew, obviously having appeared with that U20 side before in the past in his playing days, it'll be interesting to see your reaction there. But before we get to that, interesting enough, a tie between USA Rugby and Major League Rugby. The US MLR American teams, the US-based teams, so I guess everyone outside the Toronto Arrows, have sponsored USA Rugby, and you can see their logos on their jerseys. They're pretty interesting to see. Just another tie between, I guess, the rugby from a national level, tying with kind of that professional sports scene here as the MLR continues to grow.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they had to add something to the sleeves because those sleeves make those jerseys look so ugly. So they had to add something to it. But yeah, I'm gonna eat my words once we start talking about the score.
There
Please, yeah, Ryan, enlighten, give us the
enlighten you.
news.
Yeah, you're waiting for it, Fitzy. Yeah, you're waiting for it. All right, I'll get it out of the way here. Matt and I, obviously being native Canadians, this one's a tough pill to swallow. But Fitzy is going to bask in the glory. Maybe a little bit of a preview on what he may be feeling this upcoming weekend. But yeah, USA Rugby, a dominant win, 43-21 over the.
I mean, I'll start off with this before Fitz gets like everything that I've read is that US Rugby has taken this series. They've had a professional style lead up and kind of development of the players, having them together before this. And from my experience with Canada, it probably, they probably weren't together for that long, honestly. And you look at some of the like the pathways that are growing in the US, I think it's all building, and this is the momentum and just a result of all that momentum of the development of the youth in the US. But I'm sure Fitzy knows all about it.
Yeah, Matt, I agree with you. It's a shame that both the U.S. and Canada are not in the upcoming Rugby World Cup. Like an absolute shame here for North America that the men's Eagles and Canada is not at the 2023 Rugby World Cup. And I think when U.S. and they had 3 cracks at it, right, from Uruguay, Chile, final qualification tournament, not to rehash all that stuff, right? And the U.S. had to beat Canada to advance. Again, a shame that the men's Eagles in Canada is not there. And I think U.S. took a step back and realized, hey, we've got the Rugby World Cup. We're going to host in 31, 33 men's and women. Like, we need to get stuff together here. And they brought in Scott Lawrence, an American coach. And I think those pathways are coming. He's making a big strides in the sense of reconnecting past Eagles with current Eagles and kind of bringing up that camaraderie and like that collective spirit. Like, we have a big opportunity here. Let's do this. How do we fit MLR in? How do we fit, crossovers, the American Raptors in? Like, there's so much energy coming out of South America with rugby, which is awesome. SLAR is going off. Uruguay and Chile are in the Rugby World Cup with Argentina, like amazingly, which is great stuff. But yeah, USA and Canada needs to get the stuff together. And I got to say, I get a sense there's optimism on the US side coming out of what happened. I can't say that's the case with Canada right now. Like, I don't know what's going on. It seems eerily like quiet, and I'm not sure what that's about. And maybe because I don't have my finger on the pulse there, but I don't get the sense that good times.
I think you're pretty close to it. You can pretty much guess the state of kind of how things are too, and it doesn't help that the sole Canadian MLR team too, the Toronto Arrows, are not looking at their best right now as well, which we'll obviously get into because the matchup over the weekend against the Houston SaberCats definitely just added to the pile of a tough season that they've had so far, which we'll obviously get into. But all right, last thing that I want to cover in the news notes before we get to the Fantasy Ruckers League update, which is the big one here.
Yeah.
Got to talk about Bodine Walker because I think that was a big thing when it came, especially from the fantasy side of things, because obviously with the announcement of him returning to the New England Free Jacks, there was a lot of hype, especially with what he was able to do last season, #1 player, or at least among the top players last season for fantasy MLR. This season, coming in midway through after a stint over in Japan, signs back with the New England Free Jacks. A whole buttload of money was dropped on him with the expectation that he was going to slot himself right back into the lineup. Again, we had that conversation. There was that risk that you're going to take, especially with the season dwindling down. You were kind of relying on the fact that he needed to make, I believe, 5 appearances with the New England Free Jacks to be eligible for the playoff run that they are going on right now. And the reason why we bring him up is because just last week, just after we had released last week's episode, there was an announcement that he has signed with the Manawatu Rugby Club, the Manawatu Turbos, over in the NPC Bunnings Cup overseas in New Zealand. Again, we've talked about this before. No overlap with the MLR. This is one of those leagues that runs on the offside or the off season of the MLR. So it's a nice little pairing there. So these guys stay in full rugby form. So Bodie Walker will be doing that over the MLR off season. But yeah, just kind of crazy turn of events here, and just kind of interesting to watch how New England has approached this whole Bodie Walker situation, or maybe not so much because they've been so successful with the guys Potros and with Reese McDonald that they've had. But it's just interesting the shockwaves that it has had in the world of fantasy MLR, with obviously John being the one that dropped the $69 there on Bodie Walker, which was over 50% of what he was allotted for this season. And really, I would say, I think we can all look in hindsight, really didn't pay off so much in terms of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think only the short thing I just want to say about this. Yes, it's good that the fact that, he's signing for an NBC Bunnies Cup team, he can play for both. But you got to remember that this is the direct pathway and where the Super Rugby teams are watching. We've had the treat of watching Bodie Walker play. We know his skill level. And we've seen, we've lost guys to Super Rugby, guys who were a big part of the MLR kind of campaign in the past few seasons. So there's always that possibility. But again, he seems to love New England, and I can definitely see him continuing to come back.
Yeah, I was interesting how New England is using him. I thought he maybe would have a little bit more of an impact on the field, but I think New England probably brought him in slowly. You can't just even though he was the MVP of the league last year, you can't just insert him in the lineup. The team's humming. New England was humming along, just fine without him. Now adding him certainly brings a dynamic element to what's going on there. But I think what's most interesting is that he is, Maddie, you bring up a good point. He is signed for the next 2 seasons in MLR, but, that certainly can be changed. He can certainly be bought out of a contract if Super Rugby comes calling, or if he goes back to Japan again, where I'm sure he made a little bit more coin. But, if you look at the MLR playoffs, I believe each player needs to be eligible on a match day 23 for 4 games in order to qualify for the playoffs. And right now he's at 2 because he didn't play in the last round. So he has to be on the match day 23 for round 17 and 18 to be able to be used in the playoffs. So I anticipate that's going to be the case, but we'll see.
And I mean, I'm sure this was a part of the plan. I'm sure this was all laid out. We just don't know it because obviously we're the outside looking in. But I have no question in my mind that New England Free Jacks laid this out for Bodie Walker and say, hey, these are the matches you'll be playing. This is the matches you'll be coming off the bench. These are the matches you'll be sitting out, or at least a rough kind of blueprint of that. It's just interesting. Obviously, as fantasy managers, we didn't know that. And now, like we said, it has come to fruition that it's kind of too late, that he really is not going to have an impact, at least in this fantasy MLR season. It would have been interesting if one of you had him heading into this week, but obviously, John not being in the playoffs now anymore, Bodie Walker is not really going to have any use for him.
Maddie spent all his money in round 1 anyway. He was gone with
that. Would have been interesting. That would have been a huge topic of discussion if you had some of that fab left over and we had a free agent like Bodie Walker sitting on there. That'd be.
Hey, Ryan, before we move on to the Fantasy League update, just wanted to throw in a last quick note. The MLR, I think last week, if you want to, a month out of advance into the finals, you want to see DJ Diesel, you want to take a trip to Chicago, you can now book a nice little fancy little package that they put together, a vacation package or a flight package to see the game. Got tickets, got seats, got hotel, flight, everything a month in advance, because we're all booking, we all haven't even thought about booking the trips already. So way to go, MLR, for announcing that so early. Way to go.
All right, we'll have to get a little, hopefully maybe we can get a little Fantasy Ruckers League reunion out in Chicago. That'd be a pretty good time. We'll try to get that in the works. We'll see what we can do. But all right, let's get to it. The most anticipated Fantasy Ruckers League update in the history of the Fantasy Ruckers League.
This is the only time that I'm going to enjoy hearing this trumpet.
Love this trumpet.
Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. All right, hear ye, hear ye. Here is Commissioner Yee with a Fantasy Ruckers League update, and we are finally here. It is championship week.
Yep.
2 teams remaining. Rugby morning, Ruck and Roll left in the Fantasy Ruckers League playoffs. One of them will have their name etched on the jersey behind me on the Fantasy Ruckers Championship jersey. One name is on there right now, the former champion, John, lads on tour, but he won't be the only name there on there anymore, as one of you will be on there. All right, before I get into it, guys, kind of your mindset heading into round 16 and just kind of how the weekend played out for you, the emotions that were involved as you were waiting to see whether or not you were going to book your ticket into the Fantasy MLR final.
Fitzy, go ahead, man. Go ahead.
No, Maddie, I was going to let you start first because honestly, I like to talk a little trash on the Discord channel that we had. And I got to say, I backed off of it because I didn't want to jinx myself. But when I was looking at what was going on with Dankest Anchors, and I saw that Paulie Bellicana had a good game and Slade McDowell had a good game, I almost was like, oh, I know Matthew's shaking in his boots right now. And I
don't even have to explain myself because you read my mind. You read my mind, Fitzy.
But I didn't hit send. I was like, you know what? Maybe I don't want to jinx it. I pushed my buttons too much in the Discord channel. I'm gonna take a step back and let it happen. But I'm on the inside. I was nervous because I was looking at my lineup. Guys weren't playing. Guys were coming off as reserves. So I was like, I can't talk too much trash. So that was me going into Sunday when I knew I needed some big moments from some of my guys. But Maddie, please.
Yeah, I mean, I was texting Ryan the same thing, saying like, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to pull it off. I'm watching, Kieran McClure. I'm watching Paula Balakena. All these guys on Hokies team were just going off, and I was looking at my guys, waiting for guys to score tries, and they found a way to do it in other ways. But yeah, I was nervous going into all the way up to score calculation. But
I was watching all of that Sunday night game. I was staying up late East Coast, 10:30 kickoff time to watch Seattle and Utah because I had 3 players gone, and I needed some big moments from some guys. They came through, but I'm a little nervous because there may be an injury concern or two. So something to think about going into this championship round.
And I think right there is a great example of how fantasy MLR, at least playing fantasy MLR and being in it, changes the way you watch the game and changes the way you feel about the game, changes the way how you approach the game, the anxiety,
makes you
stress.
You stay up and watch a 10:30 p.m. game.
Exactly. When you got work bright and early the next day, when it comes to fantasy MLR, there's certain sacrifices that you need to take. But nonetheless, let's get into it, and then I'll ask you guys some questions here. But yeah, we had to.
Yeah, I mean, we got to talk about. You're going to bring up the toilet bowl, right? We got to.
Of course. We can't forget about the toilet bowl. The toilet bowl is, if not as important, a little bit more important because it just goes to show you the people who, despite going through the struggles, are still in it, even if it's for a crappy poop emoji toilet bowl championship trophy. That just goes to the dedication of the league members that we have in the Fantasy Ruckers League. But let's talk about the big semifinal first. Obviously, like we mentioned, Maddie, Ruck and Roll, you were taking on Hokies, Dankest Anchors, and what was a very, very interesting matchup as I was statting it out because like you mentioned, Matt, really, your team has been explosive all season long, having these big-time players, Nate Oxberger, JP Duplessis, guys that were just going off for you. But this week, it seemed like a different way of you getting victory. And I don't know if it was the fantasy gods just saying, hey, you know what? You made it this far. We know what you went through in 2022. We got to get you into that final to take on whoever, to at least give it a shot. I'm not going to say you're going to win it, but I'm going to at least say that to give you a shot at redeeming yourself and being able to at least experience some sort of fantasy MLR glory. So you're able to come away with the win, 100.1 to 84.5's Hokies, Dankest Anchors. We'll get into the player performances that really helped you get you there. But yeah, like you said, sweating a little bit, I think, as you were watching some of those games. And then over to your semifinal, Fitzy. I mean, talk about a almost perfect week. You say you're sweating in your boots, but I think most of that is because you had to basically put up a perfect week in order to get past MLR Stats' James Dealey's team there because he had himself a week 2, I believe his highest of the season so far. Are you going with an interesting kind of strategy there without the scrum half?
Well,
didn't go out.
I did have a scrum half. I immediately dropped him looking ahead because I got some roster moves to make.
Go.
So Pedro Imhoff, right? The Dallas Jackals, Imhoff, the Dallas Jackals scrum half got me like 1.4 points or something like that. So
There you go. All right. But hey, you had big time performances all across the board. I think the biggest one, which we'll obviously get to, man, you've been riding the coattails of Joe Mono. And we talked about the kind of earlier in the season, Joe Mono was up there in the top, then kind of tailing behind Matt's Nate Oxberg, almost a reflection of how you guys have been going back and forth. And nonetheless, after the past few weeks, Joe Mono, he's been absolutely incredible. But we'll break that all down. But yeah, big time win, 114 points. The biggest biggest of the week by any fantasy team, which is a good feeling to have heading into the championship week, taking
Unless you're
down
peaking at the
James
wrong
Dealey's MLR stats, 104.8. Now, the question remains. This is the big question that I have for you. Is this the way you wanted it to be? Now, I said in the teaser that I couldn't have scripted it any better. Matt, you've been riding the high of this fantasy MLR season all season long. Rugby morning, John Fitzy, your team has been, you've had some highs and lows, but you've been creeping up, getting into that second spot. Now we got the top two teams. As commissioner, I got to be pretty happy because obviously we're seeing what is our two best teams heading into the final. But for you guys, though, is this how you guys want? I know you guys have, like you've alluded to, been back and forth on the Discord channel just a little bit.
Ryan, I told Fitzy this I think a couple days ago. That Ryan, this is exactly how we wrote it up. You know, we told each other how we're gonna calculate the scores. We're gonna make sure that we made this happen, right, Ryan? We wrote the script before the season.
Right.
We said, look, this Fitzy guy is getting out of hand with his poop emojis. You know, just 3 too many poop emojis, and we decided you got to take him down in the finals, and that's exactly how we wrote it up. This is how it's gonna happen, and you know, I couldn't be more excited to go against Fitzy over there.
I will say, yeah, Maddie, I agree. Like the fact that we're meeting the final is fantastic.
It's poetic.
If I didn't make the final, it would have been magical if the Rucking Goat Vandy could have pulled off the craziest turnaround and make it in the final to face you. That also would have been equally great. But
Yes.
I'm happy I made it, and kudos to Vandy for almost getting to the playoffs after that.
It's all about improvements. He finished almost at the bottom of the heap last season. Now he's just on the cusp of playoffs. It's about, you know, little goals. So we'll see what he's able to do in 2024, and I'm sure we'll be able to hear from him in when he returns to the show here. But what I will say too is that it is interesting, because obviously we had a handful of new members this season heading into our league. Obviously we had James Dealey's MLR stats, the most successful new member out of all the new members, but obviously also had Rugby Wrap-Up joining, Eagles Overseas joined as well, and obviously MLR All Access is Give Me the Loots team as well, being able to do join us in there as well. I think we either learning the hard way or learning the long way that fantasy MLR isn't as easy as it seems to be. We did have Rugby Wrap-Up making the playoffs as well, and obviously falling a little short there, but kudos to the new members of the league. I wanted to just at least give
I thought they acquitted themselves pretty well, all things considered.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All access, you got some.
Hey, we've said it before. We all need our own version of the Toronto Arrows or the Chicago Hounds in our league, so it's all good. We got it from there. But yeah, let's quickly talk about the toilet bowl finals before we get into a little special what's on the line talk discussion about what's actually at stake here for your MLR fantasy MLR final. But hey, quickly here, 5th place final, Lads on Tour taking it, 67.2 points put up there. I think the biggest one though, toilet bowl finals, the Rucking Goat taking on Stephen Lowen. And I don't know if this is a comfortable space for the Feral Hippies and Stephen Lowen, but hey,
this is called a dynasty, Ryan.
Exactly, back-to-back toilet bowl champions. Send him another
He's heating up NBA Jam style.
Another stack of toilet.
Send him some more Charmin.
Send him some more Charmin because he's able to do in back-to-back years, falling short of making the playoffs. Nonetheless, gets his ticket in the toilet bowl playoff run, and he finds himself champion once again over there.
Like so the Walmart version of the Patriots.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And obviously,
what does that even mean?
and then going to the toilet bulliest round there. Eagles Overseas coming up on top, putting up 66.3 points this week. But all right, talking about what's at stake here before we move on to the actual games here. Hey, you guys got a big time thing on the line here. It's all for charity. We did it last season. Lads on Tour, I believe, donated his $100 winnings to BC Grassroots Rugby last season, helping develop club youth rugby in the British Columbia region out west there in Canada. And this year, we got the choices between Rugby Morning and Maddie, Ruck and Roll there, able to choose here who will be getting that $100 charity prize there, whoever wins this championship week. So Maddie, I'll start off with you, man. Charity for you. Who are you representing heading into this final? Who is going to potentially get that big time $100 bill?
All right, so I chose a charity up in Ontario back in had to choose something back from the homeland. I'm going to be donating to Iroquois Roots Rugby. Essentially, they're a organization that is trying to help build, the sport of rugby within First Nations youth in Ontario. They're doing that by helping promote, healthy living, helping promote active healthy living within the First Nations communities, while also kind of helping to continue to promote the Indigenous culture. And we've seen kind of the impact in the rest of the world, Australia, rugby in the Pacific nations, of just the impact that rugby can have on the Indigenous culture. And why can't that also be in Canada as well? So that's where I'll be putting my donation towards.
There we go. All right. Fitzy, for you, man. I know we had some long discussions there and some thought going into who's going to be getting that $100 donation. So for you, who are you representing heading into the 2023 Fantasy MLR Final?
Yeah, I'm gonna bend the rules a little bit here, and that's fine. I'm gonna make
Says who? I'm the commissioner. I don't think you're the one that determines that, but hey, I'll be listening. I'll listen.
I'll tell you what, the winnings, I'll match the winnings on my own. So I have two charities in mind. One, the Washington, D.C. Youth Rugby. I'm a volunteer youth coach for that one. It's a free nonprofit rugby program in Washington, D.C. Kids from 5 to 18 can play for free. It's a great program. I've been having a lot of fun helping coach there. The other one, and this is more of because this dates back to the very beginning of the season when I sent a direct message to Billy Meeks on Instagram, basically fanboying on him that I was going to draft him number 1 overall in the fantasy MLR draft. And that if I won, I would donate the money to his charity. He didn't get back to me, but I'm hopeful that, when I spank Maddie here, that I'll be able to donate the money on behalf of the Fantasy Ruckers League and Matt Yee to Billy Meeks' charity. So heads up, Billy Meeks on the DM.
All right. We'll see there. I'll allow it. Because it's for charity, I'll allow the two charities in. But I will say this though, I do love the way that Fitzy chirps, because it's so subtle, it's so beautiful. It's not really upfront, but he'll just sneak it in there, Maddie, and he'll just say, "Hey,
like a light." It's like a light slap.
Just
a light slap on the face.
Get enough of those though. Get enough of those start to hurt though. And we'll see whether or not.
Well, I've been taking haymakers. We've been taking haymakers from Maddie all season long. Oh my goodness!
Oh, not luck. It's not going to stop here. We still have half hour in this episode.
All right, let's get into it. All right, we've talked enough about all the news and all the fantasy Ruckers League stuff. Let's actually get to the nitty gritty. Let's start talking about these matches. Fitzy, we're so happy to have you on this breakdown of the show, on this portion here. So let's start talking about the results that we had that led to your guys' big time victories to buy yourself a ticket into the Fantasy MLR Final. And we'll start off with the first matchup of the weekend. Rugby Atlanta taking on the New England Free Jacks at home. This was an interesting one because Rugby Atlanta kind of keeping up with New England for a portion of the match. Obviously, part of that was a very lucky interception by Martini Talapusi getting there, taking it to the house, kind of keeping them within it. But then I think they could only hold for so long as New England Free Jacks start to pull away with the things towards the end there. But for you guys, kind of overall thoughts before we get into the Fantasy MLR breakdown of things and the top performers from this matchup of this Rugby Atlanta New England Free Jacks matchup.
Yeah, I mean, we were calling this last week that, the Rugby Atlanta side is not that great. And the New England Free Jacks side is just, they're on a roll, defensively, set piece, offensively, everything is looking good for them and they're peaking at the right time. And, even guys like, we're going to bring up Kieran McLeod, but, a guy who's replacing John Pullen, one of the best nines in the MLR, is coming out and showing that, New England Free Jack doesn't just have a starting 15, but they've got depth. And even if injuries come, they can fill those spots and they can fill them with quality players.
Yeah, a disappointing season for Rugby ATL after the last 2 seasons, back-to-back playoff berths, one, I think, all the way to the Eastern Conference Final before losing. So this year, rebrand, that maybe didn't go so very well, but disappointing effort on the field. And they had some individual fantasy pieces there that, Biddle and Waitokia and a couple others in the front row and Momsen and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I guess just in the game, New England, you said it, Maddie, you hit it. Like their depth's so good that, I mean, that is a team that you pick for like, okay, who is New England playing and are there any free agents available? Because you could pick up a guy like Reese McDonald and get quality fantasy points out of him. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding. Well, let's talk about some of these fantasy players, and why don't we start with Reese McDonald, because he scored a try in this one. Pretty big time performance by him, 101 meters gained in this one, and adding that try, very very good touch on there with that kick, being able to get that ball down in the try zone. A total of 16 fantasy points for Reese McDonald. He added 3 tackles on top of that. Pretty solid performance there by the fullback for New England.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Reese, he had a bit of a inconsistent start to the year.
Yeah.
You also didn't know when you're going to find him in the lineup. But the last few weeks, I mean, he's just been coming into form in that fullback position. And it's making it really tough for the New England Free Jacks to say, hey, we're going to throw Bodine Waka in, because Jason Potros and Reese McDonald are, fly half fullback. They're class right now.
Yeah, 18.2 in round 13, 17.6 in round 14, and then now in round 16, 16 points there. So he's had 3 straight double-digit performances, all above 15 points. Reese McDonald definitely up there in the.
Well, I know it's funny. I think Reese McDonald. I know I had Reese McDonald on my squad at one point earlier in the season. I think I had him in round 6 when he put up 3.5 points, and I was like, to heck with it.
I'm pretty sure Matt had him on his team as well at some point.
I had all the 10s on New England Free Jacks at one point.
There you go. All right, and then shifting over to another big time performer, Paula Bellacana, obviously adding a try there, 53 meters gained, a try assist, 6 tackles, 84 minutes played, 14.1 fantasy points. He's a guy that, I mean, we've been talking about him all season long. Just steady. Huge pickup at the start of the season, Matt. I think you called it right at the beginning, where you thought he was going to be one of the pickups of the year. Outside of 2 weeks that he started in, every single week has been a double-digit fantasy performance. The past 7 in a row have all been above 14 points. This guy has been just electric this fantasy season.
Yeah, just try scoring machine.
And then last player that we need to mention, obviously you touched on, Matt, Kieran McLeay, solid there in his fill in there for John Poland, adding 2 tries there. At least from a scrum half number standpoint, 12 points. Now he's got back-to-back weeks with double digits.
We're going to talk about this. You're going to see a trend when we talk about these games, but we've been saying scrum half's low scoring, but this week was a turn of the tides there, and I love to see it.
Yeah, sure. I know.
We've seen some big scrum half performances this year. Connor McLeod, right? 3 tries. That's a position where I just can't figure out, man. I don't know what I'm doing there, but I'll still beat Maddie. But yeah, it's just a position.
And then on Rugby Atlanta side, really not much to be had. I mean, outside of, like I mentioned, that big time steal by Martini Talapusi, who basically took it to the house, which was a big chunk of his meters gained. I mean, 14.8 fantasy points, 85 meters gained, and a try there. Really not much else to be had for this Rugby Atlanta side.
Yeah, I mean, they've been a tough team to have fantasy wise. Outside of the key guys like Rewuda Biddle or some standout performances from some guys, it's tough. The only guy I'll kind of bring up is Johan Mumsen, but he's just consistent. Consistent as a second row, always getting high single digits or double digit points.
Yeah.
9.1 points this week. Which
I had Atlanta's hooker Alex is in Morgan for a couple of rounds before Atlanta picked up Sydney Tobias. Alex was scoring just about a try a game there for a stretch. I think he had a stretch of maybe like 3 or 4 games where I was like, I'm just going to keep plugging him in. And then they brought in Sydney Tobias, and then, Alex has shifted over to prop, and he doesn't get those points off of the line out anymore, that 5-meter line out. That's where I was getting points, tries for him. And once they picked up Sydney Tobias and plugged him in that hooker, his points were gone, and I had to drop him.
Yeah.
And we brought him up last week. We brought him up as a waiver wire. Right? He put up 10.7 points this week.
Yeah, and he's in every single appearance since he's joined Rugby Atlanta, double digits, which is perfect to be had a front row. He's also still in the free agency. I will say Reese McDonald's also still a free agency, so I know you two.
I'll bid Maddie for both.
As you get your plan going forward, it'll be interesting to see how you guys approach those guys. But all right, let's shift on to the next matchup. The first matchup of the Saturday here. NOLA Gold taking on Old Glory DC in this one at home. This was a big one for Old Glory DC, obviously with that tight Eastern Conference race. They get business done, 28-15. Really, Old Glory DC taking care of business. I mean, NOLA Gold has been struggling over the past few weeks. Some of that injury, some of that just poor play. But hey, nonetheless, Old Glory DC taking advantage with the 28-15 win there over in New Orleans.
I mean, for me, NOLA Gold's they've really been impacted by the loss of Jordan Jackson Hope. I think JP Duplessis and Jordan Jackson Hope are they were one of the better center pairings, and having those two making gain line ball just helped them move their offense forward. They were getting quick ball. That's when they were playing well. In this game, quick ball wasn't anywhere to be seen for them. They looked static. They looked, their offense looked stale. They couldn't get anything going. They didn't seem to be making the right decisions. I'm sure it didn't help with Reese Botha coming in as a last minute replacement for Rodney Iona.
Yeah, you were lucky there with that Jordan Chait start there, Fitzy.
Yeah, I was nervous about that. And I gotta say, if you look at the top fantasy performers, and I think I think Maddie, I hate to say it, but you struggled there the last two rounds because JP Duplessis, I wouldn't say he came back to earth, but like he wasn't scoring as much. And the simple fact that he's still, I think, top 2 or top 3 scorers in the league, even after having softer performances the last few rounds, just go to show how dominant he was over large stretches of the season. The reason why you were, would run off such a big lead, but now you're brought down back to earth because you can't plan for the future. But I was nervous going into this game. I thought JP Duplessis was going to run over Old Glory because their defense is a type of defense where they are susceptible to give up some big plays. And I figured this might be like a huge effort for NOLA. They got to win to keep their playoff hopes alive. They're at home, and DC was able to bottle up their defense a little bit and bottle up JP. And
yeah. I mean, it didn't help that they literally didn't get front foot ball the whole game.
Yeah.
Like Nola Gold is awful. I am gonna bring up something though that Kyle Bailey's try. I know you have Fitzy, so I had to bring this up.
I was about to get
First of all, that shouldn't have happened. That should have never happened.
It's a very
they go to the TMO, and the TMO says, "Yeah, we're checking a tackle off the ball," and all the replay shows is they're watching the grounding. And I saw the tackle off the ball. I watched it with my own eyes. I said, "Yeah, they're gonna bring that back. That's an easy call there." And they didn't even replay that replay, and they give Kyle Bailey good for you, Fitzy, but hey, that's
the forward-esque step that got him that was
that was impressive.
I think the refs just couldn't take it back. Like that highlight reel's got to stay.
That is true. And I mean, hey, he had a good week. Outside of the try, I think he played really well.
Yeah, he did. He jumped the line. He's now my favorite Canadian. You guys moved to 2 and 3 as favorite Canadians. So Kyle Bailey.
There you go. All right. Well, hey, that big fantasy performance. We'll get right into it, and with his performance to start off with. Obviously, there's another guy that I got to talk about on Glory DC as well, who had even a bigger performance. But hey, Kyle Bailey, 15.7 fantasy points, his best of the season so far since joining Old Glory DC. 59 meters gained, a try assist, 16 tackles as well. I wish I could add points for that step too, because he would easily push himself into the 20-point range if I was able to do that. But nonetheless, 15.7 points for a second rower is definitely something that is very valuable in the world of fantasy MLR. But the guy I want to talk about, Marcos Young. I mean, 125 meters gained, a try assist, 6 tackles, 22.3 fantasy points. Moving to that back 3 position on the wing there after having some appearances there at the center position, or making subs in at that center position for a while there. But hey, nonetheless, Marcos Young doing well in this one.
He looked really, I mean, the way that he was breaking the line, and the way that he was, being really physical with the ball when he had it in his hands. I mean, it was great to watch. And
he's popped for some big performances over the season. And it's interesting with Old Glory, right? Because they've got some interesting selections there at wing, right? Him, Junior Sowell, who was 4th in try scored for DC or in the league last year. Penny Lasanga is a guy that is a game breaker, so they're definitely all fighting for spots. And sure, it's helpful that Young can slot in at center as well. But yeah, anytime you can either slot him in the starting 15 or bring him in as a reserve, he's a game breaker. He's a good young player. Yeah. Domestic player too, I believe.
Big lad too.
And Fitz, you mentioned Penny Lasaka as well. I mean, he's a guy that's been pretty solid over the past course of the month. 11.7 points in this one, pretty solid stuff. 40 meters gained, a try with 9 tackles. He now has gone 4 straight weeks with double-digit fantasy performances, so pretty solid for Penny Lasaka for Old Glory DC. Shifting over to the NOLA Gold side of things, again, when you're only scoring 15 points, only scoring that 1 try, really not many fantasy points to be had. We can mention Reese Botha, obviously in that spot start against over Rodney Iona there, 12 fantasy points with that try. Pretty solid stuff at that 10 position. I guess the biggest one though, Jordan Trainer. I mean,
Yeah.
22.1 fantasy points, 202 meters gained. This guy has had bursts of what he's been able to do, and he shows it in this round 16 against Oklahoma.
Yeah,
BC.
I mean, look, he was good on the counterattack. That's what helped him out fantasy wise. If you could lose points for making bonehead decisions, he would not have 20 points because some of the decisions that he was making on the counterattack, some of the decisions he was making on, I think even a quick tap that he had, it was just boneheaded, and it just added to kind of why Nola Gold looks so bad. Yeah, he had the one big break, but yeah, unfortunately, we don't dock points for being a bonehead.
And hey, maybe that is a little bit of a preview of strategy, because I know that's something that's all been cooking your guys' brain, kind of how this strategy, after going through one full season of this stuff, what is the approach that you're going to take in the 2024 season now that we have this new platform? It should be interesting. Maybe it'd be things like that. Maybe, hey, we know that sometimes that these guys make boneheaded decisions, but at the fullback position, when you have the opportunities to counterattack and get those meters gained, there's a whole lot of points to be had there. I know, Matt, you were experiencing that early, maybe not from the errant decision part of it, but Duncan Matthews was one of those guys that wasn't really scoring many tries, but he was getting a whole bunch of meters off the counterattack. That was kind of
pretty sure that guy's dead right
a Jordan Trainer-esque performance this past week. But all right, let's shift on over to another game on the Saturday here. The Chicago Hounds taking on the San Diego Legion. 36 to 14 victory for the San Diego Legion away from home. Interesting one, though. Chicago Hounds scoring the early try to start off with. They always do this. They always do that. A set piece try there, maul it in there, but then as it was kind of close, San Diego again pulling away with things, showing that they are the number one team right now in the MLR.
It's like Chicago Hounds hate the second half or something. You know, they always come out really strong to start. They always go into halftime close most of the time. And then the second half, they just decide that they don't want to win the game anymore. And it's, you know, at least Toronto's consistent. They lose for the whole game most of the time.
So I've got actually, and I'm glad it didn't come to this. So I bit my lip here. But in the official scoring for MLR stats, Blair Cowan got credited for a try, but it wasn't him. It was Sam Malolo. Because if you watch the replay again, Cowan gets it. They go into the maul. He hands it off behind him to Malolo, who ends up scoring. It officially was credited to Blair, and it's showing up as a try scored for him. So that was going to be my ace up the sleeve. If it was like, hey, I lost by like 4 points, I could be actually, guys, let's go back to the tape and change this. I'm glad I didn't get to that, because that could have been testy. But if you go look at MLR, if you look at the website, they ended up changing it, because they officially did. They gave it to Blair Cowan initially, and then they ended up changing it back to Sam Malolo. So glad we didn't get to it, but that could have happened.
That's just the intricacies that it takes if you want to get yourself into the final. You need all.
I watched
all
that
the
video
aces up
back
your
and
sleeve.
forth for a good 5 minutes just to be sure I had that right.
Yeah, absolutely. But hey, again, I think San Diego Legion just taking advantage of obviously a Chicago Hounds team that is still trying to find their footing. Really outside of scoring that try there, Hugh Roach early on. It was tough for the Chicago Hounds, especially when you take on a defensively stout side like San Diego Legion. But hey, lots of performance here for the San Diego Legion. It ends up with, I want to say first, I mean, Christian Poitevin. Looking solid, looking fast. First game back, scoring that try, looking good. Has the speed, beating the winger outside there, and also I believe getting that try assist as well on the day too. So 20.6 fantasy points for him, 8 tackles, the try assist, like I mentioned, it's breakdown steal as well. Poitevin, after not having made an appearance since round 8, comes out here in round 16 with a 20+ point showing.
Yeah, he looked good. He looked really good. And I mean, we saw this before, I think before he got hurt. But you know, he came back, made a statement game, and had a good game to come back against Chicago Hounds as well.
I noticed he was not in the starting lineup though for Dankus Dankers, and that could have turned the tide for him.
It definitely would have turned the tide for him, and I was happy he was not in the starting lineup.
That just goes to show you how ruthless fantasy,
It
any
is.
fantasy sport can be. You make one wrong lineup decision, not knowing it, obviously heading into the week,
Yeah.
but you can be kicking yourself, moving forward off that. We've all had our fair share of those types of decisions if you've had your experience with any fantasy sport, fantasy
Yeah.
MLR or not. Another guy in San Diego Legion that I want to mention, Thomas Awake, huge performance here. 2-try performance, 104 meters gained, 11 tackles, 24.2 fantasy points. Now he has back-to-back 20-plus point performances. Awake looking solid for San Diego, especially on a team that can score points.
Yeah, we're starting to just expect this from him. I think when San Diego does well, he does well because you know that they're giving him the opportunity to score tries.
Absolutely. And then last guy I want to mention here, just because he was so pivotal, even when he's not scoring tries, man. He hasn't
my
scored
scrum
a
half?
try.
You bringing up my scrum half?
No, I'm not bringing up. Oh, yeah, true. Your initial scrum half. But a guy who has not scored a try since round 9 still gets it done for you. Huge performance for him in terms of what it meant for you and your fantasy win. 117 meters gained, 2 try assists, 5 tackles, 83 minutes played, 18.2 fantasy points. And if you haven't guessed it already, it's been Nate Augsburger, who Matt originally drafted as his starting 9 in the initial draft, ends up being one of the fantasy performers of the season, not at the 9 position. Doesn't even appear once at the 9 position, but at the wing all season long. If you ask Matty now, he said he meant to do that all along.
Sure did. Exactly. No, but I mean, all serious note. Yeah, I mean, when he has an off week, it's usually, he's a little bit quiet, but when he's on, you can see him getting involved. You can see the way that he's kind of finding his spots, and yeah.
Nate Augsburger has been a revelation, man. He has been unreal, right? Because when I saw him out on the wing, I was like, man, what is San Diego doing at the beginning of the season? Like, do they not know where they want to put him? But man, he has just had a dominant season. Now he hasn't scored a try, right, as you mentioned, since week 9. So that makes me nervous that he's going to pop here in our championship. But I got a player on my side who hasn't scored in a while, who I think will pop. So we'll see.
We'll see here. All right. And talking about a player that you do have, Fitzy, there on the Chicago side. They're really, again, when you're scoring only 2 tries here, of all forward tries, not much fantasy points to be had when it comes to the Chicago team. We've discussed it before. But I think what's been interesting, and now that we have you on the show, Fitzy, to discuss about this, it's kind of been a conversation we've been having here on the Fantasy Ruckers show, is the whole notion with the Chicago side and the trust that you have with some of these players. And that includes a player that heading into the season was a top player. You mentioned it earlier. You messaged him, should I take you number 1 overall? And that's Billy Meeks. And in this one, pretty solid showing. I mean, 15.8 fantasy points, 100 meters gained, 16 tackles. At this point, I think Matt and I's consensus with Billy Meeks is because he's on a team like Chicago. I think you can rely on him to be consistent for you. He's going to get you double-digit points from the tackles, from the meters gained. But I think it is hard to rely on him now to give you those explosive games where you're getting 25 plus points, which you maybe would have expected for a guy that you were thinking about taking first overall. You're not seeing any of those Joe Mano games. You're not seeing any of those Nate Augsburger games. He's just been very, very consistent, which is not a bad thing, right? Especially because you were able to draft him in the 3rd round because of his questions with that visa stuff and him not being in the lineup until round 4 of Chicago. So that kind of maybe saved you a little bit there. But nonetheless, Billy Meeks, solid. Not necessarily explosive. We're going to win you any week on his own.
He's the type of guy who I'm going to ride or die with Billy Meeks, in the sense that if you look at his performance over the season, you mentioned it, it's been very steady. He had 1 week where he popped a week 9 where he had a try and over 100 meters gained and got me 22 points. But if you look at his fantasy performance, though, he's top 11 as a scorer, and that's without playing 3 weeks, right?
That's true.
So he very well could be, just based on a steady performance, top 5 or 6, right, if he had started at the beginning. So, I don't want to tip my hat too much to what I'm going to be doing here, but particularly as I'm looking at, who Chicago is going to be playing in round 17, and they're playing the Utah Warriors, a team that, they like to play fast and loose, and they leave themselves open for some attacking opportunities. That will Billy Meeks be in the starting lineup? I can't say with certainty, but when
See,
I
that's
reach
the worst smokescreen in the world. We know you're playing Billy Meeks. Don't be throwing that nonsense out
He
here.
goes, he's been one of the top players all season long.
One of the top players.
But I don't know. I don't know if I'm
I
gonna put him in
DM
there.
him on a daily basis.
I slid into
That's
his
what he's
DMs. He did
saying.
not respond, but
So, but hey,
I do have another center option to William Talataina, who I didn't play
True.
this last round, and I thought about playing him because I figured DC was going to drop a ton on Nolan. It didn't happen, but he's the guy who's had some steady performances, and they're placing a Houston team who defensively hasn't been playing all that well this year. So hey, maybe Willie T gets the start over Billy. We'll see, Matt. We'll see, buddy. You have to
Start whoever you want. It's not going to change the outcome.
There you go. I mean, I will say though, I think before we move on to this next matchup here, I think what Billy Meeks highlights is that there's two types of fantasy players that can be very valuable when it comes to fantasy MLR. You got guys like Joe Mono, like Nate Oxberger, who
massive ceiling,
massive ceiling, and those are the guys that are going to win you weeks. Right, they're going to win you weeks, but they could also lose you weeks as well. They might have a 5-point performance here and there, but there's guys just as valuable like Billy Meeks, where he's not going to do anything flashy. He's going to get you at least 12 fantasy points every season. He's not going to lose you a week. He's not necessarily going to win you a week. But I think you guys, both of you are showing it. Points add up. That's correct. But matchups definitely don't stack on each other, if you know what I mean. You know what I mean? Like, you're taking it week by week, and you got to take each week on its own. But I think what is highlighted here by your two squads here making it to the final is that you guys all have a good mixture of both of those types of players. So you can rely on different guys to get you big weeks, or you might have weeks like Maddie where you just need a consistent performance by everyone to get you by. We'll see how those all play out in round 17 for you guys in the final. But yeah, let's shift on over to the final matchup of the Saturday. Toronto Arrows taking on the Houston SaberCats at home. Didn't matter that they were north of the border. Houston SaberCats taking care of business. I don't think I really need to say anything else. The Toronto Arrows were able to put up 26 points, a lot of that coming at the end there. I heard the announcers say that this is probably the way they wanted to play all game long, but they did not do that until the final moments of this matchup. Houston SaberCats, I believe, had 31 points by halftime.
Yeah.
So
I think they had the bonus point by half. So.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah, I mean, all I'm going to bring up, I don't even care. I'm just going to bring up two guys, Jack McRogers.
I knew you were going to bring these guys up. I know
scoring those 3 tries at the end of the game. Jack McRogers, what a legend, scoring the try, getting back to his ways with his head in between some cheeks. And Owen Rattan scoring a double on the same game that he scores his first try in the MLR. So what an absolute legend. Two guys that I love. Two guys that I love to see get in the end zone. And
yeah, both.
That's all I have to say about the game.
Both friends of the show.
Exactly.
Both friends of the show. Yeah, I mean, I really don't think there's much to break down. Toronto is going to be Toronto. I know that they are on or they are taking on. You probably are licking your chops at this one, Matt. They're taking on the San Diego Legion next week, so that will be an interesting one. We'll see whether or not what would be interesting, and we'll get into it, is whether or not San Diego decides to sit some guys against the Toronto.
Hey, we don't have to get there yet. Let's talk about some Houston guys.
But anyways,
first.
Let's talk about some Houston guys there. I guess the biggest performer of the week in this matchup, I mean, Lourdes Vanderskiff. Good to see him back, getting onto the point total here and being fantasy relevant. Had the 10.4 fantasy point performance last week in round 15.
Yep.
Comes out with a big one here in round 16, 20.3 points, 2 tries, 63 meters gained, 10 tackles. Lourdes Vanderskiff taking advantage of a struggling Toronto team.
Yeah, what a mutant, but wish we saw that more this season.
Yeah. A couple other players scoring tries. I mean, Joe Tafetti, he's looked like he's been a pretty solid ad for Houston, scoring a try in this one. Wyan Grassman as well, 1 try, 30 meters, 13 tackles. Christian Dyer, Drew Wild, Kenny Nasukiki, all getting onto the try board on this one. Everyone getting a little bit of a share, a lion's share, at least in the scoring against the Toronto Arrows.
Yep. And I mean, I think the big guy for me is actually Dylan Smith coming back. I think, he scored 9.3 fantasy points this week. Again, first scrum half, that's unreal. But I think it's good to see him back. I think he's kind of filling that void of Davey Coates being gone as well, being a guy that has experience in managing the game.
And I mean, you mentioned Davey Coates. I got to give props to Robbie Povey, because he's been able to step in that kind of fly half role for Houston pretty solidly over the past 2 starts. I mean, he had that big time performance last week with that 2 try assist, 24.7 points. This week, backs it up again. 15.2 fantasy points with 45 meters gained on the try assist, 9 tackles, and he's pretty solid from the boot. 4 conversions, 1 penalty kick. Pretty solid for a fly out position, stepping in there for an injured Davy Coates. All right, let's shift on over to another kind of blowout matchup on the Sunday to kick things off. The New York Ironworkers at home, taking care of business against the Dallas Jackals. Again, Dallas, I feel like they've done this before too, coming out with the early try, getting on the board first, but then after some kind of back and forth affair, New York just really taking care of business and running away with this 43-14.
Yeah, Dallas looked rough really quick after that first try. They couldn't seem to get anything else going. I know the wind was a little crazy as well, which probably didn't help them in that first half. Didn't seem to help them in the second half either. But yeah, I mean, either way, I think when Dallas loses, they look better than other teams like Toronto, like NOLA, when they're losing, which is encouraging sign for them looking into the next season. So yeah, I mean, New York kind of dominated most of that game.
Yeah, New York is starting to really come into form, which is when they need it, because these next 2 rounds, well, 4 in the sense
we've seen them do this though. Fitz.
Yeah,
you know, we've seen them against some teams. Like they looked good against Toronto when they beat them 80-5, but you know, it was you gotta do it against the good guys.
That's a good point.
Yeah. All right, well, let's talk about some of these fantasy performers. I know one guy that I know Fitzy is very, very happy to come out with the big time performances, Ed Fido, because obviously for a guy that you've picked first, overall in the entire fantasy MLR, very top
rough decision
MLR pick. It's actually interesting because even if you went with Billy Meeks first overall, you really wouldn't be in a different situation. You know what I mean? Honestly, you might even be Billy Meeks might have actually been a better form because it was looking solid for the first 4 weeks for Ed Fido. Goes through a little bit of a lull. I out of the lineup for a little bit, but comes back here in round 16, 16.9 fantasy points, 100 meters gained, a try, 8 tackles. It's got to feel pretty solid that he's once again back on the board after a little bit of a lull. I know he had a couple double-digit performances back in round 12 and 13, 22 points, a season high there in round 12. But it's been up and down for him, and there was a little bit of a stretch there where he really wasn't doing much for you.
Look, there was another famous athlete in the New York market who said, "Give me the damn ball," and that was Keyshawn Johnson, and that's got to be with Ed Fido. Give him the damn ball, and look what happens. New York wins big. He scores tries. I'm happy. I get my name etched on that jersey. Natty gets the poop emoji. Give Ed the damn ball. That's all I gotta say.
There you go. Another big time guy for New York. I mean, Connor Buckley, talked about performing scrum halves. He got it done.
You need a 9, Fitzy. Sorry, they're all in my school.
17 fantasy points, 60 meters gained, 2 tries and a try. You picked up Connor Buckley?
Oh, I got Connor Buckley. I got Richard Judd. At one point, I had Connor Buckley, Richard Judd, and Carlo Dinesh.
I played Connor Buckley earlier too. I think I got to try when I just got to try when he.
That is funny. But
Connor Buckley. Yeah, Connor Buckley. I mean, look, he's turning into one of those 9s, and I talked about this, that the 9s had a week this week. I mean, Richard Judd, Kieran McLeod, Connor Buckley, you know, Dylan Smith, we talked about him, but Connor Buckley, Kieran McLeod, Richard Judd, these guys are doing it in ways of being able to actually get meters gained, being able to score tries on those support lines. It's becoming a habit for Connor Buckley, at least. You know, we've seen it 2 games in a row and a few games in a row, I think. But
if you noticed, Connor McManus, who's been out the last few weeks because of injury, he was a reserve. He came on. McManus has typically been their starter. I could see him getting slotted back in.
Yeah,
who happens to be on my roster.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll see. We'll see. The battle of the Connors is also part of this final.
The battle of the mind games is where it all comes in. Other try scores here for New York. Pago Haini scoring one. Not really doing much from a fantasy perspective, but try scoring there.
Finally played a full game.
Yeah, Tavita Lange, Charlie Hewitt, Nick Feeks, all getting on the board as well. Shifting over to the Dallas Jackals side. Again, there's some fantasy performance here. I think the 2 that we can mention, Conrad Arura, solid, been good for Dallas, especially from a fantasy perspective there. 3 straight weeks now with double-digit performances, 18.8 in this one with 86 meters gained, a try and 14 tackles. And then also we got to mention Luis Sitama. He did solid in this one as well. 14.2 fantasy points for him, 79 meters gained, a try in there too.
I'll just bring up my boy like I always do, Adrian Boyson with the
You
scrum
love
cap.
bringing
He
him
came
up.
in. He came in with the scrum cap this game. You know, he looked good with his blue scrum cap, red boots. But also, on a serious note, Thomas Kubia making, I think, his first start for Dallas after being being brought in as one of the big signings, being part of the Jaguares at one point. He had a decent game too. I think got like 12.1 points. Maybe a waiver guy. I think he's in the waivers.
I'll outbid you.
I believe so. 9.9 fantasy points in this one. 43 meters gained on 72 minutes played. 12 tackles and a steal as well. Yeah, he could be someone that you may be looking towards in this one that we'll talk about in a certain moment of time. All right, well, let's shift on over to the last matchup. And I think this was the matchup that everyone was watching for, and it was a fun one, back and forth affair between these two teams. The Seattle Seawolves taking on the Utah Warriors at home. A tight one. Utah scoring that late try there to try to get it within one score. Couldn't get it done in the end, though. 27-20 victory for the Seattle Seawolves.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about this earlier, is that just Seattle Seawolves are coming into form. They had a rough patch in the season at the start of the season, the middle of the season, but they are coming into form at the right time. They seem to have gotten their lineup down. This Jordan Chait Alatimo at 12 seems to be working. But they look scary as well in that West.
That match felt like a playoff match. Like that was intense. Bodies were hitting the deck. And actually, if you're Seattle, you got to be a little bit nervous with New England coming in, because Rhino Herbst left with an injury. I couldn't tell if it was like an elbow. That looked long term. AJ Alatimu had to leave the game early, grabbing at his knee. Potential concerns there. So, Hadding is still out. He's probably visiting his doctor.
Well,
so we'll see. I know that's Maddie's joke, but
I'm wearing an A-Rod jersey right now, so it's kind of fitting.
All right. Well, let's talk about some of these fantasy performers, because when it's a back and forth affair like this, we often have a whole bunch of them in this one. I think the guy that Fitzy's itching to talk about is his fantasy hero.
We don't need to talk about him.
He's scary, man. Joe Mano. I mean, he's been absolutely incredible this season. I know you had his back since the very beginning. He's our top fantasy performer in the entire season, leading into this final week. It's not even close anymore. I mean, he's ahead of Nate Oxberger by more than 20 fantasy points right now. I know when we tweeted out on the Fantasy Ruckers page, Fitzy, about the top performers, mentioning Nate Oxberger, you said, "Hey, look at my boy Joe Mano." And for a little bit there, it kind of looked a little bit not too good, because Nate Oxberger started pulling away. But after these past couple weeks with Joe Mano, I mean, it's not even a question anymore. 4 straight weeks with 20-plus fantasy point performances. He's coming off of his second highest, tied for second highest fantasy performance in round 16. 25.6 fantasy points, 2 tries, 105 meters gained, a try assist, 7 tackles. The only reason why that's not his best fantasy performance on the week, because he had that killer of a hat-trick performance in round 6 that got him 35.6 points. But man, Joe Mano, I mean, has been absolutely incredible. Only 3 times this season has he scored less than 8.2 fantasy points. That it's just he is going to be our fantasy steal of the year, no question about it.
And yet, if you watch that game against Seattle, that midair collision where Futi kind of pushed Bailey Wilson and Wilson ran into his own teammate, Mano, as he was going up for that catch in the second half, he did not look the same. He was looking a little gimpy. He was running around. He was gifted that try at the very end there that got me over the top, but he was grabbing at his knee and he looked in serious pain, which makes me wonder if he's going to be questionable for round 17, and Utah's got a real big match. So I'm a little bit nervous that my boy may not be available.
Well, the thing is, if they're in a position of San Diego or in the position of Seattle or a position of New England Free Jacks, I could see them not playing him, but they need him. He's a crucial part of their offense, and if he's healthy enough, even the slightest bit of healthy enough to play, I don't see a reason why they would keep him out of the lineup.
Yeah. All right, another guy that we got to play that's pretty pivotal with his Utah Warriors side. I mean, Caleb McEnany. He's been solid. 147 meters gained in this one. Try assist, 3 tackles, 20.1 total fantasy points. He's now gone 6 straight weeks of double-digit fantasy point performances. 7 out of 8 have been above 10 points. Round 9, I mean, it's basically there, 9.9 fantasy points. But yeah, Caleb McEnany, even without necessarily scoring a lot of tries, he's basically a non-try scoring Joe Mono. Essentially, you add the tries in there, and that's what Caleb McEnany is. And even despite all that, he's been having great performances. I mean, 4 straight weeks of above 12 points, 5 straight weeks of above 12 points. Been incredible.
Yeah, those 15s, I'm telling you, those meters gained, they add up. But another guy in Utah we got to talk about as well is Calvin Whiting, Calvin Whitting, whatever you want to call him. The guy's a beast. They put him in ever since they put him in at the center position. Ever since they started putting him in the starting lineup, he's been showing why he should have been there all season. And I mean, looking at it now, 18.6 fantasy points, 134 meters gains. That's 4 weeks in a row with double digit points. And like he's whoever had him picked up is definitely happy. I mean, it doesn't matter anymore. But
A couple other guys that I want to talk about. Bailey Wilson scoring a try in this one. Pretty solid for him. 14.2 fantasy points, 65 meters gained a try.
and became
9
the youngest
tackles.
player to get 50 caps.
That is correct. That is correct.
He's only 23. Crazy.
I didn't even
Crazy.
know. I didn't even know he was that young.
Crazy. All right, shifting over to the Seattle Seawolves side of things. Not as explosive necessarily from an offensive fantasy standpoint, but hey, still pretty solid. And I guess the guy that we got to talk about because he's been electric these past few weeks is Liana Foodie. I mean,
He's so good.
17.4 fantasy points in this one. A try, 93 meters gained, 12 tackles. He's coming off of that big time hat trick performance in round 15. He obviously had the hat trick performance before that in round 13. I believe, Matt, you mentioned last episode he's the first player to have
Multiple hat tricks in one season.
But yeah, in this one, it looked just as solid here, and he has been very, very good towards the latter half of this fantasy MLR season. Pretty solid, honestly, all season long too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he does it with power. He does it with steps. And speed, and he just does it all.
Yeah. Another guy I want to mention, Martin Isafo looking pretty solid in this one. He had 99 meters gained, a try assist, 8 tackles. The try scores in this one, Samu Manoa as well in there, and Ben Landry too. All solid. But yeah, I mean the big one, Futi in there, pretty good stuff. But yeah, this matchup sets up for a very interesting tail end of this last Western Conference race, and even the Eastern Conference. These last 2 playoff spots that are up for grabs. It should be an interesting one, guys. But yeah, hey, an exciting round, and what a perfect week to have a full slate of 6 matches too, in a match in a week that had so much meaning, at least for the world of fantasy MLR. We'll see how it plans out. But speaking about how things are going to pan out, this is the time now before we start giving our predictions for what is going to come in round 17. Let's talk a little bit about your guys' strategy and your mindset heading into your championship week here. So I'll start off with you, Fitzy. Waiver wire, lineups. What's kind of your approach here? You don't have to give too much away. I know your rival here is on the show. I'm sure taking notes. Learned that from John Taylor sticky
not
notes.
if I want to lose.
But for you, kind of what are your thoughts in trying to get your name on this jersey behind me here in being our second ever fantasy Ruckers League champion?
Yeah, I think there may be a position or two that I'm going to take a look at where may not be a strength for me, and I'll see what's available. And as always, a lot of it is matchup based, right? And it's some of it is that guesswork on looking at the matchups and our team's going to rest some players. Is there a position where there's a couple on a certain team that I'm eyeing maybe that could fill in for me? But I think
name them if you want.
I think I'll name them. I don't mind after the episode airs, but after I think for the most part, right, the squad that has carried me this far is pretty much going to stay intact. It's kind of some of the pieces off to the side here and there that could be the difference between having my name on that jersey or not. And I've got a little bit more money to spend than Maddie too. So some of the calculus is trying to looking at Maddie's roster and figuring out what he is going to try and do. And then maybe it's just me outbidding him on the things that are the players that I think he's going to go after.
You won't be able to figure me out. You won't be able to figure me out. No, but I mean, I'm with Fitz there. Like, you back the lads. You back the boys. You got here with the boys. You back them. Everybody has some positions where they can afford to take some flyers. I think we might be surprised. I think both Fitz and I might be surprised when we see some of the lineups out. And some guys that maybe we rely on aren't including those, and that's going to make us scramble. So at that point, we're going to be kind of He'll be the first guy to get him at that point once the free agent window's open. But yeah, my strategy: back the boys, and we'll see. I honestly I don't even think I'm gonna make any bids in the waiver wire just because it's gonna be so lineup dependent anyways.
Oh, the mind games. I love it. And I will say, as a spectator, looking in, a very excited spectator, I should say, I think that will be the biggest thing. I think as we approach this last week, seeing, we mentioned, which we'll get into the matchup, like, for example, the San Diego Legion taking on the Toronto Arrows. Do they decide to go with some lineup changes that may have an effect? It'll be those kind of rebound decisions that you guys need to make in trying
No,
to
Ryan, I'm going to
figure
jump you. Look, I'm going to break down Maddie what's going to happen here. I'm looking at his roster, right? If I'm
Okay,
him,
you
he's
tell me.
concerned. He's
You
concerned about
tell
what's
me.
going to happen at fly half because I'll tell you
Oh,
why.
am I?
Yeah, because Davey is not playing. He's hurt, unfortunately. Coates are Houston fly half. His other fly half is
might see Reichert's
Patros. He
doctor.
might not make the trip. He'll make the trip to Seattle. Maybe they don't play him because maybe they're just taking a look, or maybe he's coming off the bench, so maybe he doesn't get starting minutes there. So you
Okay.
got to figure out who else could play fly half for New England, and that's Waka or that's McDonald, and those are already currently on rosters. So Maddie's going to have to look at another fly half there. That's going to hurt. If you're looking at the scrum half position there, he's got Richard Judd. He might not be starting. Maybe Jason Higgins starts for San
Oh.
Diego. Maybe that's a guy I pick up and I outbid
Oh,
Maddie for. So it's
maybe
like
you
little
do.
things like that where, you got to get creative here. And I could probably pick apart a couple other things. But yeah, right there, those are two big things that I'll have to,
Oh, there
you
we
know.
go. I love
Wow.
it. I love it.
Hey,
I
look,
love it.
you're reading my mind. How'd you know, Fitzy? How'd you know? How'd you know?
But all right, should be an interesting one. I mean, if that doesn't explain kind of the mind games that are going to be heading into this weekend, I don't know what really does, because again, a lot on the line here. $100 on charity. Either going to Matt, your Iroquois. I want to make sure I say this right.
Iroquois Roots Rugby.
Iroquois Roots Rugby, and then for you, Fitzy, DC Youth Rugby there. And
Yeah,
also
or Billy Meeks
potentially,
charity.
or Billy
Yes.
Meets Charity. That's
Both.
always a good one.
Both.
All right. Well, let's quickly get through these last games here. And let's talk about some predictions here. Fitzy, I know your usual rugby morning social post goes out there with your predictions of the week. So I don't know if I'm catching you a little bit early with this one,
we
but
suck at
nonetheless,
these,
we're
Ryan.
putting you on the line. We're okay. A good thing that we haven't been keeping track of it. Houston, the first one to open up the week, Houston Sabercats taking on Old Glory DC. This was a huge one. I mean, I know that Old Glory DC have already clinched up the playoff spot there. I'm sure they're going to try to want to get home field advantage over New York there, and try to keep on getting these victories. And Houston, they're still in a very tight race, 4 points ahead of the Utah Warriors in the standings in the West. They have not clinched their playoff spot yet. A win for them would go a long way in doing just that. For you guys, kind of, I mean, this should be an interesting matchup. I mean, both are potentially high-scoring teams. You got the Houston Sabercats that could take apart a Old Glory DC defense, but Old Glory DC has shown that they can score points too. I'm not really shying away from any fantasy players from this one, I would say.
Yeah, I got to agree. I mean, it should be a really good game. I think both teams have something to play for. It's not just a throwaway for Old Glory DC, and Houston's obviously still fighting for that last spot. So, I mean, I'm going to take Houston on this one. Sorry, Fitzy, but I'm going to take Houston on this one. I just think Old Glory DC at under 500 really hasn't done a lot to prove to me that they can go up against some of the top teams.
Yeah, both teams have a lot to play for. It's going to be a fun Friday night. I'm sure the weather's going to be nice. There's going to be some running rugby out there. Here's the spectrum. Old Glory DC, they've got a couple things in mind, right? Like, there's a team that can score tries, so you got to think they're going to go for 4 tries, at least get that bonus point there, right? And then if they can hang and stay close, say they don't beat Houston, but they lose by less than 7, you score 4 tries, you get, you lose by less than 7, you get those 2 table points. That helps stacking up. But I think Old Glory DC's got a shot here. I'm going to take Old Glory DC. I think this could be a back and forth game that DC wins at the end. Both have so much to play for. I think this will be a fun one to watch. I'm going to take DC. I think they win this one by 5.
Wow. Oh, even going with the score
That's
there.
right.
Well,
They're going to prove to everyone else that's dogging the Eastern Conference outside of New England that they're all bad. I just think they're battle tested. They've been beating up on each other. It's like the NFC East, like, they just run the ball all the time and tough defense, right? That's what it is. When they play those fancy West Coast offense teams, they just beat them up.
I wish our podcast listeners could see Matthew's face to that, because he definitely has something to say about that. But I'll take Houston in this one. And I will say, just to add as a quick note, for all either current fantasy managers or future ones to keep in mind. These matchups are the ones that tends to be the most fun and have the most points when they're back and forth affairs and have a lot on the line, especially when there's going to be points to be had, when there's teams going for those bonus points. Those are definitely matchups.
Maddie's definitely starting Nick Suchan. I can guarantee that.
All right, let's shift on over to the next matchup on the Saturday. The Dallas Jackals. This one is it's gonna be an interesting one. Dallas Jackals taking on the NOLA Gold. Obviously, two teams coming off pretty tough losses in round 16. I'm just gonna go over this one quickly. I'm not really sure I have any faith in NOLA Gold players outside of your top guys. Dallas, obviously, I think same mentality there. I'm not even playing the fact that both of these teams are strong. That either of them can necessarily take advantage in this one. But I'm gonna go Dallas in this one.
Yeah, I got to see Dallas. I mean, I've been back in NOLA Gold all year, but they just stunk last game, and they've been stinking the last few weeks. So Dallas Jackals, they're going to take the dub here.
Yeah, clean sweep on Dallas here. I think they pick up their third win, and be interesting to see if NOLA Gold trots out Duplessis or not.
Yeah,
interesting.
that'd be a big one.
Interesting at the end of that game, so we'll see.
All right, New York Ironworkers taking on Rugby Atlanta in Atlanta. This one's in a big-time Eastern Conference matchup. Obviously, New York is in that final Eastern Conference playoff spot. Rugby Atlanta right behind them, trailing by 10 points. So they'll at least need to get this victory to have a chance at possibly having a shot at superseding New York in that final round 18. I mean, again, I think it's really hard for me to side with any Rugby Atlanta players at this point. Just nothing on that team really pops for me from a fantasy perspective. New York, I mean, they showed it against the Dallas Jackals. They always have the ability. Maybe I don't have 100% confidence as I would have had maybe at the start of the season. But nonetheless, I think New York is going to put up some points here, and I'm going to side with New York in this one.
These are the types of games that I just have a hard time trusting New York. I know they came off a big win against Dallas, but we've seen them this season just drop games that they shouldn't be dropping at crucial moments. For whatever reason, I'm going to side with Rugby Atlanta in this one. I just have this feeling that New York is just going to blow it.
Man, I love that pick. If I wasn't such a coward, I would pick Rugby ATL as well. I'm going to take New York in this one. Rugby ATL has so much to play for, right? Like they have to win this game. New York has to lose both their matches. Rugby ATL has to get 2 bonus point wins just to be able to leapfrog New York. This is a game that New York should win, right? But I could see Atlanta, taking this one, but I think I'm going to be a coward and take the New York Ironworkers.
And let me just state for the
We're
record,
going to pay for that this weekend in the matchup.
Let me just state for the record that Matthew makes that Rugby Atlanta pick as he's wearing a New York Yankees baseball jersey. We'll just say that. All right, shifting on over to the next matchup on the Saturday. The Utah Warriors taking on the Chicago Hounds. Talk about a lot on the line for the Utah Warriors. They got to win this one to stay in that battle with the Houston SaberCats. Houston SaberCats loss against Old Glory DC would go a long way here, but they'll still have to take advantage against the Chicago Hounds team. I mean, I'm playing all my Utah Warriors players in this one. This one is going to be, I think,
even play Joe Mano, even if he's not in the start.
I think Utah is going to take advantage of the Chicago team. I think they're going to do well. I think there's going to be a lot of fantasy points on this Utah side.
I don't think there's much to talk about. Chicago still stinks. I checked last week. They still stink. I check next week. They'll still stink. Utah Warriors are going to win this one.
Utah's going to
get the bonus point too.
Utah needs the bonus point. Chicago probably doesn't win, but they could have a chance because they'll be competitive through 55 minutes or so. Expect a big performance from Billy Meeks because he knows he's got $100 going to his charity of choice.
The bias
he hasn't even looked at it. He hasn't even looked at your DM once.
All right, shifting over to Sunday. This is going to be a juicy matchup. The San Diego Legion traveling north of the border to face the Toronto Arrows. Can go two ways here for me. San Diego Legion either plays a not so good matchup, or I should say not as their top tier lineup, with knowing how much the Toronto Arrows are struggling. But I will say though, they still do have stuff on the line. I mean, they could
Yeah, they still.
potentially,
I
they
mean,
could
they're
potentially not get that first seed locked up, which would be massive because obviously the Seattle Seawolves have been playing very well. Seattle obviously has a tough matchup that we'll get into in just a moment's time here, so they still need the win. The question is whether or not they are confident enough to be able to get that done with maybe their B-sided team. I know, Matt, what team you're going to be
I
rooting for
mean,
that gets slotted on the field, and Fitzy, I know what team you'll be rooting for that gets put on the field for the San Diego Legion from a fantasy perspective. But nonetheless, I mean, San Diego's winning this one, no question.
yeah, I don't even think we have to go too much into it, but I think San Diego still's got something to play for. I think you can afford to play your guys, get the win, and have a bye leading into one of the most important games, the Western Conference Finals. But I predict that San Diego is probably going to start with their top guys and then pull them off pretty early and have those bench guys come in quite early once they build a lead.
Yeah, I mean, San Diego, they should win their 12th straight now and extend their winning streak. But hey, Maddie brings up an interesting point. Maybe it's not money you necessarily spend, but at this point, if you've got the money, spend it. But if you don't have the money, Maddie, then you hope that whatever happens in the waiver wire, guys don't get picked up, because I do think there is a chance that San Diego
You're
may
the only
start.
guy picking people up, Fitzy.
I do think there are a couple of guys that San Diego may start, right? So like maybe Higgins trots out at scrum half starts.
Yeah.
Maybe we see Lutz running out at center. Maybe they decide to rest Nanu a little bit. So like those could be guys you potentially
Guy's
pick
40.
up.
He doesn't need rest.
We'll see.
All
But
right.
yeah, San Diego's winning this one.
All right, and then last matchup of the weekend. This one should be the matchup of the week. For the most part, I mean, I think so. This is
What is
a
I guess,
preview of what we could see in the championship round. I mean, I
But
know
if I'm the Free Jacks, why we know Seattle's physical. The games
fair.
against Seattle is always physical. Why would I even risk it? The Eastern Conference stinks, everybody but them. They don't even have to do anything. They have everything locked up. They got Old Glory DC under 500 behind them, so they don't even have to do anything with that. So like, why would I even? You put in Waka for like 20 minutes, have him in the 23. You just play an easy game, make sure nobody gets hurt. Seattle's going to take this one for that matter. They got way more on the line, way more to play for.
Fair enough. Fitzy, same.
It's hard. It's funny because it's hard to contest with that, right? Because like, if you're New England, do you care if you lose a regular season match to Seattle if you see them later in the season, it's in the MLR final and you want to beat them there? Like, no one will care that you lost them in the regular season, right? So it's like, why even really like kid up for this? But the other side of me is, and I don't know how much this was just gamemanship, but Scott Matthew, the New England coach, was on a podcast last week and he talked about how, hey, they've locked up the number 1 seed. And he was asked the question, what's going to happen? He's like, I got a room, and I'm paraphrasing him, but he said competitive mofos in that locker room, that they're not just going to like lie down. So
yeah,
maybe New England throws out, a solid 40 minutes of the starters, just kind of feel out Seattle, just to, get a look at them, see how things go, take some learnings back. And, if they lose the game, whatever, because it's a regular season game, we've got, as Maddie said, the Eastern Conference locked up. We can learn a couple of things. So all of that tells me that I do think Seattle wins it, just because they're at home. They need to win, because if they do want to get that top spot from San Diego. But I think it will be a fun match.
And maybe this is looking too much into it, but is there any chance they look ahead and say, hey, maybe we would rather have the Legion have the bye, and let's give Seattle a hard time here because of Seattle's championship pedigree and what they've been able to do in the playoffs, and just say, hey, you know what? Let's give Seattle a tougher. It is. It's a whole bunch of 3D chess. But again, I think
a lot. Maybe instead, Fitzy, what you should do is just ask Potros on Eagles Happy Hour. Ask him all the hard-hitting questions for this fantasy matchup. I need to know. You need to know. That's what, right after they listen to this episode, they just go right over to that and figure out everything they need to know about Potros.
I'll keep that in mind. You're right. We are interviewing Potros on tomorrow night. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, and that comes out Wednesday night, right? What time is that at? 10 o'clock? Typically?
9 Eastern, 9 p.m.
9 Eastern. So yeah, make sure you tune in. We were on the show with Bill Baker and Fitzy not too long ago. It was a lot of fun. So make sure you tune into that. Always good conversation there.
Be there.
But yeah, all right. I'm going. I know, Matt, you said Seattle in this one. I think I will. Oh, it's tough. It is tough to say because I think if New England puts out their top lineup, they really are competitive in this one. I think New England wins this one, but you have me second guessing here, Matt. And I think Seattle at home, why risk it? I think I'll go Seattle in this one.
There we go. Fitzy also went Seattle.
Yeah, I went Seattle. Yeah, I
Okay.
think
All
Seattle.
right.
I think it's close,
Right.
but I think Seattle.
Another fun weekend of matches, another full slate of matches this weekend, which couldn't be more perfect for our final championship week in Fantasy MLR to wrap up our 2023 season. I got to say, before we find out the victor after this week, because I can only imagine the show that we're going to have next week that's going to be just filled with a whole bunch of nonsense in terms of talking themselves up in terms of who is getting their name on this jersey. So I'll take the time to say it now. I'll probably say it again next episode as well. But can't thank our league members enough as well. Just been so fantastic this season. Having the website. Got to give another shout out to Alistair Kirschpool for all his work with the fantasyruckers.com. Make sure you check him out. Again, he helps with Fitzy there with the Glorious Rugby podcast, the unofficial fan podcast for all Old Glory DC fans. So make sure you go check that out wherever you get your podcast. And yeah, it's just been an absolute blast here. It's been a completely, and I'm sure I'm speaking for you guys as well, and you guys agree, that just been a completely different season when it comes to the stats we've added, the way that we've been able to play it, the way you can set up your lineups, just everything about it has just been absolutely incredible. Again, still working towards making and fine-tuning all the little adjustments here, making it better and better, and hopefully in the near future be able to open up to the general public for everyone who wants to play a little bit of fantasy MLR. But before we wrap up the show, I think the best way to finish it off is give you guys a little bit of a moment here to talk, either whether it's a little bit of smack, talk a little bit of confidence, and your last words heading into the championship weekend, and where we'll decide who's getting this name on this championship jersey behind me. I guess since Matt, since we are the hosts of this podcast, we got to be cordial here. And
we should let the guests go first.
Give Fitzy the mic first here and let him say what he needs to say and get off his chest before a very intense week of preparation and exciting weekend of championship fantasy rugby.
No, I think there's three things that I need to bring up.
Oh.
One, we got to start off with the fact that Rock and Roll and Maddie has the greatest fantasy rugby team that's ever been put together. I'm just honored to even be in the championship with him. Like all the pressure's on Maddie. Like he is expected to win. This is the greatest team of rugby players that's ever been assembled. Like he should hands down just run all over my team, right? So like all the pressure's on Maddie.
All right.
To win. But two, as we've seen throughout the season, though, his total fantasy points against has been one of the weakest. And if you look at my team, I've been dumped on left and right, and yet I still have been able to emerge from all the poop emojis coming from you, just throwing haymakers at the rest of the league. And I've still been able to emerge victorious to earn a bye into the playoffs, to barely get past MLR Stats, who had a great record-setting performance from him. And third, I'm the only fantasy manager this year to put 3 consecutive weeks of 100 plus points. Check the stats. So I think right there, that I'm laying out the case. Plus, I've also got 3-1 fab money on you. So if you do try and bid on anyone, I'm going to try and out.
I told you I'm not even bid.
You know, and
not even bid.
Fourth, I'm breaking the rules, and that's fine. The People's Champ should be here. I'm going to take the role of the People's Champ. And if I win, I'm dedicating this fantasy trophy to Devin Vanderpool.
Wow,
Maddie,
that's a big one. Wow, incredible.
Wow.
All right, Matt.
You know, Vandy wants to see me lose too. That guy
he
stinks
does.
as well. And look, I've got 3 things as well. You know, you're not the only guy that can bring up 3 points. I got 3 points. 1, rugby good morning. All right. 2, rugby good afternoon. 3,
there you go.
And most importantly, what I'm gonna do this weekend is say rugby good night.
Oh, there we go. I like it. I like it. Well, we'll end off there. Again, to set it up. It's a clash of the Titans. Rugby morning emerging from the ashes, like he said, to possibly take down Goliath. It's a David versus Goliath matchup. The best fantasy MLR team of all time. Can he be taken down?
He's expected to win.
We'll find out this weekend. Again, thank you to all of our listeners. Thank you to all of our league members for following us all season long. Again, we'll find out whose name will be on this jersey in just a week's time. And we'll make sure we celebrate in due fashion on next week's episode. Until then, for Matt Yee, for Devin Vandy Vanderpool, for Fitzy and Rugby Morning, make sure you go check him out at rugbymorning.com. Sign up to his newsletter. Follow him at Rugby Morning as well. Follow us at the Fantasy Ruckers, and we'll see you next week.
Steven's the GOAT.
You've been listening to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, covering everything rugby from the MLR and beyond. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and be sure to tell all your friends. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, connect with us on social media at the Fantasy Ruckers. Till next time, this is the Fantasy Ruckers Show, signing off.